In Diablo 2, most guides focus on the endgame, but sometimes you just need ideas for getting through the early parts quickly so that you can get to the point that lets you play around with all your weird ideas. Today we're going to cover one of those builds for the early game, and that is the Lightning Javazon. Most known for her late game killing ability, she's also a solid starter Amazon build since where the poison clears crowds easy, Lightning is your boss killer, dealing massive focus damage early, only getting its strong area of effects later around level 30. This build easily transitions into our budget Lightning Javazon build released a while back, and if you're looking for advice for Nightmare in Hell for this build, that is the place to go. That said, for normal, as usual, we want to get the basic stats set up. The rule of enough strength and dexterity for equipment and the rest is vitality stands strong here, especially since in normal, block isn't really necessary or terribly useful since it will be slow as a snail in salt water. As usual, veterans can get away with dumping stats into what they need early, but for new players, I would stick with the stepped approach. 35 strength and dexterity by the end of Act 1, and a slow build across Acts 2, 3, and 4, up to 70 strength and 45 dexterity, which will leave you plenty of points in between for placing in vitality to keep your health at a reasonable level, and the 45 dexterity mark keeps you within a level or two of even the best javelins you'll find in normal. This build is also nice early on if you actually wanted to keep your stats lower, since you can pretty much clear normal even with the starter equipment. I just recommend these amounts so you can use the more interesting and fun gear you find on your way to Nightmare, though the strength is kind of useful for equipping deeper belts and better shield, glove, and boot options. That said, we should probably talk about skills before we dig too deep into equipment. Since we're talking about normal difficulty, we're generally going to be using mostly melee skills with this build since you usually don't make the shift to being a melee and range hybrid with lightning until Nightmare. Early on, you're going to be setting up your skills for later, getting your passives like Critical Strike, Dodge, Avoid, Evade. You probably even want to get a point into Pierce when you get to it, and even a point in Valkyrie is also pretty nice since you get the runes for Peace, which is an armor for the Amazon, in late normal or early Nightmare, to basically get a free and strong traveling companion, and even if you don't make that, you still have the Valkyrie to kind of pull the heat off of you and your mercenary. As for the majority of your points, they're actually going to be going into your lightning attacks and their synergies. Normally for me, I'm a point hoarder on the Lightning Javazon, only putting single points into my passives and prerequisites until I get to level 18 and can punch up Charge Strike. Though if you want a little extra damage early on, say against Andariel, putting some spare points into Power Strike can help you with these early bosses and give Charge Strike some synergy bonuses whenever you get to it. It just reduces the amount you have to spare to throw into lightning skills further down, but you'll have enough points regardless in the long run, so it's not a huge deal. While we are running melee with this build, your main attack by mid-normal will be Charge Strike, and as you get a little bit later, say level 30, you'll want to be using Lightning Strike to deal with crowds until you get replenishing javelins, at which time you can add Lightning Fury to your rotation. All three of these skills are synergies and very strong, so it doesn't hurt to move between them, as you are constantly boosting the sister skills. Charge Strike is especially powerful since all the bolts can hit the same target and do reasonable damage, and due to the size of bosses, it's much easier to hit them with all the bolts in target as well. You are unlikely to find lightning immunes in normal too, but if you do, jab is your physical backup for now, so don't be afraid to have it on a hotkey if you're really nervous about it, but you don't really need it yet usually, and you can get away with just using your normal stab. As far as Mercenaries, since this is a normal difficulty guide, it pretty much comes down to the choice between Blessed Aim and Prayer. I usually go Prayer just because it's nice to have passive healing, but if you're having trouble hitting early on, Blessed Aim Mercenaries can be nice, though only Power Strike will need it, especially since, despite saying it adds attack rating, it actually doesn't, and Blessed Aim will at least, like I said, help with that. If you're feeling really cheap, an Act 1 or Act 3 Mercenary is fine enough for normal as well, since you're not getting huge benefits from the Act 2 auras anyway. If you go Act 3, I would recommend the Cold one though, because it'll kind of lock down the enemies while you're trying to kill them with your lightning. In terms of equipment, as we said, you literally can go through normal with the starter gear with this build, but since we're focusing on new players and players who have had bad drop luck, there should be some equipment advice to make things easier, and for consistency's sake, that means rune words and shopping. Though, it is worth noting in all of the footage of actual gameplay in the background, I have been using the starter javelin. Though, that out of the way, let's get into just the simple stuff. Most of these are fairly straightforward. For jewelry, gloves, and boots, your go-to bonuses are of course going to be resists and stats, but also mana per kill is very, very nice on this build since it will basically help you with the high mana cost of most of your abilities. You would think mana leech would be kind of a high priority as well, but this build does not do a ton of physical damage, so I generally prefer the per kill method. In terms of belts, it's the same as the other accessory slots. Resists and stats are extremely nice, though I have a big preference for getting as many slots as possible on the belt with only a few exceptions, such as like Death's Sash, so a heavy belt or plated belt will go a long way, doubly so with good mods. Gambling for them from merchants can get you some decent rare results as well. Weapon-wise, I almost always keep my starter javelins, sometimes grabbing backup javelins from time to time, especially if they have replenished quantity. Reason being for keeping the starter javelins, though, is that you cannot beat the repair cost, and since you don't need a high damage weapon for this build, 1 gold every now and then for a full repair is super handy, and is the same reason we go with replenished quantity items. It's just to save money. On the helmet, a dual tier helmet can be very good for this build, or if you can get the runes for it, a lore made with Ort and Soul, though chances are you'll just be getting some tiers from Countess and slapping them in for a free +4 mana per kill. Dual tier can also be nice in a mechanics helmet if you get a nice suffix on it, since it's not actually a rune word that gives you a bonus, it's just the runes themselves. In the armor slot, there's the usual stealth, Tal and F, that is tried and true and always a good one. Though in late normal, the Amazon can also transition into peace, although usually you'll do this early nightmare, and that is Shale, Thul, and Am in a 3-socket armor that gives you access to a lot of good mods, such as casting a Valkyrie whenever you strike something, which is amazing. Also gives faster hit recovery, some crit strike, and some other stuff, so 100% recommend keeping an eye out for it if you are solo self-found or starting a new Amazon. In the shield slot, it's pretty much the same with every starter build. A 3-socket shield shot from Farah in Act 2, usually a kite shield because it's light, and slapping Ral, Ort, and Tal in it for Ancient's Pledge. That said, you could do diamonds in it as well, but I like saving my diamonds for rerolling Grand Charms in the post-game, so 3 perfect diamonds, if you can build them up, will give you more resists than Ancient's Pledge, albeit without the mana help from Ancient's Pledge. Overall, this build is just the flip side of the Poison Javazon for starting, where the Poison Javazon will wipe out massive swaths of enemies but struggle with bosses at times. This build absolutely destroys bosses from mid-normal onward, but struggles sometimes when outnumbered, basically, until it gets to Nightmare. Do you have another starter or budget build you'd like to see? Mention it down below and I'll give it a go, and as always, special thanks to the patrons, channel members, and viewers for making this content possible.